It's been a few minutes since Israel last began a new project of mass military violence, so perhaps it's time for a refresher on the official rules on how we're meant to think and talk about such matters. Rule number 1. Recorded history began on October 7th, 2023. Rule number 2. Anything bad that Israel does is justified by rule number 1. Rule number 3. Israel has a right to defend itself, but nobody else does. Rule number 4. Israel never bombs civilians, it bombs terrorists. Rule number 5. Criticizing anything Israel does means you hate Jewish people. Rule number 6. Nothing Israel does is ever as bad as the hateful criticisms described in rule number 5. Rule number 7. Israel can never be the victimizer, it can only ever be the victim. Rule number 8. The fact that Israel is literally always in a state of war with its neighbors and with displaced indigenous populations must be interpreted as proof that rule number 7 is true, instead of proof that rule number 7 is ridiculous nonsense. Rule number 9. Arab lives are much, much less important to us than Western lives or Israeli lives. Rule number 10. The media always tell the truth about Israel and its various conflicts. Rule number 11. Unsubstantiated claims which portray Israel's enemies in a negative light may be reported as factual news stories without any fact-checking or qualifications, while extensively evidenced records of Israeli criminality must be reported on with extreme skepticism and doubtful qualifiers like Lebanon says or according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Rule number 12. Israel must continue to exist in its current iteration no matter what it costs or how many people need to die. Rule number 13. The US government has never lied about anything ever, and is always on the right side of every conflict. Rule number 14. Americans only. Nothing that happens in the Middle East is as urgent and significant as making sure the correct person wins the US presidential election. Rule number 15. Israel must be protected because it is the last bastion of freedom and democracy in the Middle East. No matter how many journalists it has to assassinate, no matter how many press institutions it needs to shut down, no matter how many protests its supporters need to dismantle, no matter how much free speech it needs to eliminate, no matter how many civil rights it needs to erase, and no matter how many elections its lobbyists need to buy.